He left me for my best friend. Of course he did, because why wouldn't he? She was everything I wasn't. Effortlessly charming, always the center of attention, the kind of person who could make a room light up just by walking into it. And me? I was the afterthought, the one who held his hand when he was nervous, who listened to his dreams at 2 a.m., who believed in him when no one else did. But none of that mattered when she batted her lashes and said his name like it was a secret only she could whisper. So, he left, just like that, and I was supposed to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart and move on. I remember the night it happened. We were at a party. Her party, because everything was always about her. The room was buzzing with laughter and music, and there she was, holding court like she always did, her voice carrying over the noise like a melody everyone wanted to hear. I was in the corner, nursing a drink I didn't even want, watching him watch her. He had that look in his eyes, the one I used to think was reserved for me, but I was wrong, so wrong. She caught his gaze and smiled, that slow, knowing smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And then she walked over to him, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown to disaster. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, like a deer in headlights, watching my life unravel in slow motion. They started talking, their heads close together, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew. I knew the way you know the sky is blue or the sun will rise in the morning. It was inevitable. When he finally came over to me, his face was a mask of guilt and something else. Relief, maybe? Like he'd been carrying a weight and was finally free of it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. I laughed. I actually laughed, because what else could I do? "Talk?" I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "About what? The weather? The latest episode of whatever show you were pretending to like?" He didn't laugh. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with pity. And that's when I knew it was over. "I'm sorry," he said, and I could tell he meant it. But that didn't make it hurt any less. "You're sorry?" I repeated, my voice rising. "For what? For leaving me for her, for making me feel like I was nothing, for breaking my heart into a million pieces and not even having the decency to look guilty about it." He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger, like the years we'd spent together meant nothing. And maybe they didn't. Maybe I was just a placeholder, someone to keep him company until someone better came along. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But I didn't. I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists, my heart pounding in my chest, and watched as he walked away. And then she was there, standing in front of me with that same pitying look on her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed again, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty space between us. "Of course you didn't," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You just happened to fall in love with my boyfriend. It's not like you had a choice, right?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, her eyes filled with tears, like she was the one who'd been betrayed. And that's when I realized I was the only one who cared. They were already moving on, already building their new life together, while I was left behind, picking up the pieces of mine. I turned and walked away, my head held high, my heart breaking with every step. I didn't cry, not then. I waited until I was alone, until I was sure no one could see me. And then I let it all out. The tears, the anger, the pain. It all came rushing out in a flood of emotions I couldn't control. But even as I cried, I knew one thing for certain. I would survive this. I would pick up the pieces and build something new, something stronger, something that didn't include him. And I did. But that's a story for another time. The days after the breakup blurred together in a haze of numbness and disbelief. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just existed, moving through the motions of life like a ghost haunting its own body. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison, every corner filled with memories of him, of us. The couch where we'd binge-watched terrible TV shows, the kitchen where he'd burned pancakes one lazy Sunday morning, the bed where he'd held me after my father's funeral. It was all there, mocking me, reminding me of what I'd lost. I avoided my phone like it was a live wire, terrified of seeing their faces pop up on social media, smiling and happy like they hadn't just destroyed me. But I couldn't resist the temptation forever. One night, in a moment of weakness, I scrolled through her profile. There they were, arm in arm, her head resting on his shoulder, captioned with some cheesy quote about finding true love. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall, to scream until my voice gave out, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of their happiness crush me. Then came the nausea. At first, I thought it was just stress, my body's way of reacting to the emotional turmoil. But when it didn't go away, when it got worse, I knew something was wrong. I took a test, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the stick. And there it was, 2 pink lines, clear as day. I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the test, my mind racing. A baby, his baby. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd left me for her, and now I was carrying a piece of him inside me. For a moment, I considered calling him, telling him the truth, but the thought made my stomach churn. He didn't deserve to know, not after what he'd done. So, I made a decision. I would keep the baby. I would raise this child on my own, without him, without her, without anyone. It wouldn't be easy, but I didn't care. I was done being the afterthought, the one who waited for someone else to make her life worthwhile. This was my chance to start over, to build something that was entirely mine. And that's exactly what I did. Leaving the city felt like shedding a second skin, painful, necessary, and ultimately freeing. I packed up my life into a few boxes, said goodbye to the apartment that had witnessed so much of my heartbreak, and drove away without looking back. The new city was smaller, quieter, a place where no one knew my name or my story. It was exactly what I needed. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking, job hunting, and adjusting to the rhythm of a new life. I found a tiny apartment with just enough space for me and the baby growing inside me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft yellow, hung up a few pictures, and bought a second-hand rocking chair that creaked when I sat in it. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a fresh start. Finding a job was harder than I expected. My resume was solid, but the pregnancy made employers hesitant. I could see it in their eyes, the doubt, the unspoken questions. But I refused to let it break me. I took whatever work I could find, even if it meant temping or taking on freelance projects. Every paycheck, no matter how small, felt like a victory. The pregnancy was both a blessing and a challenge. There were days when I felt invincible, my body humming with the energy of creating new life. And then there were days when I could barely get out of bed, my mind clouded with doubts and fears. What if I couldn't do this? What if I wasn't enough? But every time I felt myself slipping, I'd place a hand on my belly and remind myself why I was doing this. For him. For us. I didn't have much, but I had a small circle of people who became my lifeline. There was Maria, the elderly woman who lived downstairs and insisted on bringing me homemade soup every week. "You're eating for 2 now," she'd say, her voice firm but kind. And then there was Jake, my co-worker at the temp agency, who became an unlikely friend. He didn't ask questions or offer pity, just showed up when I needed help moving furniture or assembling the crib I'd bought on sale. The birth was nothing like the movies. There were no dramatic screams or last-minute dashes to the hospital. Just me, alone in a sterile room, holding on to the nurse's hand like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, everything else faded away. He was perfect, tiny and fragile, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that already seemed to see straight into my soul. Those first few months were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless diapers, but I wouldn't have traded them for anything. He became my reason for everything. The late-night feedings, the early mornings, the sacrifices I made without a second thought. I'd look at him, asleep in my arms, and feel a love so fierce it took my breath away. Slowly, life began to stabilise. I landed a permanent job, one that paid enough to cover the bills and leave a little extra for the occasional treat. I started to build a routine, carving out moments of joy in the chaos. Saturday mornings at the park, Sunday afternoons baking cookies, evenings spent reading him stories until he fell asleep. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Raising a child alone was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Exhausting, frustrating, but oddly rewarding. Every day brought new challenges, but also small victories that kept me going. The first time he smiled at me, a gummy, toothless grin that lit up his entire face, I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This was my son, my little miracle, and I was doing it. I was actually doing it. Work became my anchor, a place where I could focus on something other than diapers and baby food. I threw myself into my job, determined to prove that I could succeed despite the odds. My boss noticed, and soon I was taking on more responsibilities, climbing the ladder one rung at a time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and that was enough. At home, we fell into a rhythm. Mornings were a chaotic rush of breakfast and daycare drop-offs, but evenings were ours. We'd sit on the floor, surrounded by toys, and I'd watch him explore the world with wide-eyed wonder. He had his father's eyes, but my stubbornness, and it showed in the way he'd insist on doing things himself, even when he clearly needed help. I made a conscious effort to shield him from the shadows of my past. He didn't need to know about the man who'd walked away or the woman who'd betrayed me. All he needed was love, stability, and the knowledge that he was the centre of my universe. And he was. Every decision I made, every sacrifice was for him. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were nights when I'd lie awake, wondering if I was enough, if I could give him everything he deserved. And then he'd crawl into bed with me, his small body warm against mine, and I'd remember why I was doing this. For him. For us. Slowly, life began to feel less like survival and more like living. We had our routines, our rituals, our little world, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was building something real, something lasting, something that was entirely ours. Life had a funny way of sneaking in reminders of what you were trying to forget. For me, it came in the form of a Facebook notification. A mutual friend had tagged him in a post. My finger hovered over the screen, torn between curiosity and self-preservation. Curiosity won. The photo was of them, of course. Him and her smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. They were at some fancy event, her in a sleek black dress, him in a tailored suit, his arm draped casually around her waist. The caption read, "Celebrating another milestone with my favourite person." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. They looked happy. Perfect, even. The kind of couple people envied, the kind that made you wonder if love like that really existed. And maybe it did. For them. But not for me. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach churning with every glowing compliment. "Couple goals," one person wrote. "You two are so perfect together," said another. Perfect. The word stuck in my mind, sharp and bitter. Perfect for each other, maybe. But what about the wreckage they'd left behind? What about me? I closed the app and tossed my phone onto the couch, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. It shouldn't matter. I had my own life now, my own happiness. But seeing them like that, so effortlessly content, stirred something deep inside me, a mix of anger, resentment, and a lingering sadness I couldn't quite shake. Later that night, as I tucked my son into bed, I found myself studying his face. He had his father's eyes, the same shape, the same colour. It was a reminder, one I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. But as he reached up to touch my cheek, his small hand warm against my skin, I realised something. He was mine. Entirely, completely mine. And no photo, no post, no perfect couple could take that away from me. Still, the image lingered in my mind, a ghost from a life I'd left behind. I didn't know it then, but it was only the beginning. The past had a way of catching up with you no matter how fast you ran, and mine was about to come crashing back in the most unexpected way. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, just me and my son running errands, grabbing a quick coffee, and maybe stopping by the park if the weather held. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The cafe was crowded, the air thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. I balanced my latte in one hand and held my son's tiny hand in the other, weaving through the maze of tables and chairs. He was chattering away, as 4-year-olds do, about the toy he wanted and the dog he'd seen outside. I nodded along, half listening, my mind already on the next item on my to-do list. And then I saw him. He was standing near the counter, his back to me, but I'd recognise that posture anywhere. The way he held himself, the tilt of his head, the way his hand brushed through his hair when he was thinking. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I considered turning around and walking out. But it was too late. He turned and our eyes met. Time seemed to slow. His face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like guilt. Or maybe regret. I couldn't tell, and frankly, I didn't care. My son tugged at my sleeve, pulling me back to the present. "Mommy, can I have a cookie?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. I forced a smile, my eyes never leaving my ex's. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He approached us slowly, like he was afraid I might bolt. Or maybe he was afraid of what he might find. His eyes flicked between me and my son, and I could see the gears turning in his head, putting the pieces together. "Is that—" he started, his voice trembling, his eyes darting between me and the little boy who was now tugging at my sleeve, asking for a cookie. "Yes," I said, cutting him off before he could finish the sentence. "This is your son." The words hung in the air like a guillotine, sharp and final. His face paled, and for a moment I thought he might actually collapse. Good, let him feel the weight of what he'd walked away from. Let him feel the sting of knowing he'd missed everything. The first steps, the first words, the late-night feedings, the way our son's laughter could light up an entire room. "You never told me," he whispered, his voice breaking. I shrugged, sipping my latte like this was just another Tuesday. "You never asked." And that was the truth. He never asked. Not when he left, not when he married her, not when he built his shiny new life without a single glance back at the wreckage he'd left behind. He didn't deserve to know. Not then, and maybe not now. But here we were, standing in the middle of a cafe, his world unravelling with every passing second. "Mummy, who's that man?" my son asked, his voice innocent and curious, and I felt a pang of something. Anger, maybe, or sadness, as I knelt down to his level. That's someone from Mommy's past, I said, keeping my tone light, like it didn't matter, because it didn't. Not anymore. He stared at me, his eyes wide, and I could see the gears turning in his head, the realization dawning that he'd missed out on something irreplaceable. I didn't know, he said again, as if repeating it would somehow make it better. Of course you didn't, I said, standing up and smoothing out my coat. You were too busy living your perfect life to notice. And with that, I took my son's hand and walked away, leaving him standing there, his perfect life crumbling around him. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's living well. And I was living very well. The walk home was a blur. My son skipped beside me, oblivious to the storm raging inside me, his tiny hand warm in mine. I kept my face neutral, my voice light, answering his endless questions about the man in the cafe with vague, careful words. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter over and over like a broken record. His face, pale, shocked, guilty, haunted me. The way he had looked at our son, like he was seeing a ghost, stirred something deep inside me. Anger, yes, but also a flicker of something softer, something I didn't want to name. When we got home, I busied myself with the usual routine: snacks, toys, bedtime stories. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the cafe. What would he do now? Would he try to reach out? Would he tell her? The questions gnawed at me, but I pushed them aside. I had a life to live, a son to raise, and I wasn't about to let the past derail me. Still, as I tucked my son into bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The encounter had opened a door I'd thought was firmly closed, and now I wasn't sure how to shut it again. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going back. Not to him, not to her, not to the person I used to be. I'd built a new life, one that was mine alone, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. It didn't take long for him to reach out. 2 days after the cafe encounter, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. "Can we talk?" The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything left unsaid. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend it never happened. But another part, the part that still remembered the man he used to be, was curious. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let the message sit there, a silent reminder of the past I'd worked so hard to leave behind. But he was persistent. Over the next few days, the texts kept coming, each one more pleading than the last. "I just want to see him. Please, I need to know him. I made a mistake. Let me fix this." The last one made me laugh, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. Fix this? As if years of neglect and betrayal could be undone with a few texts. But still, I couldn't bring myself to block him. Finally, I agreed to meet him. Not because I owed him anything, but because I needed to see his face when I laid down the rules. We met at a park, neutral ground, with my son safely at daycare. He looked older, more tired, the weight of his choices etched into the lines on his face. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tentative, like he was afraid I might bolt. I crossed my arms, my expression unreadable. "This isn't for you, it's for him. If you want to be part of his life, it's on my terms." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and regret. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She showed up unannounced, standing on my doorstep like a ghost from a life I'd buried. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Do we?" She flinched but didn't back down. "He told me. About the baby. About everything." I raised an eyebrow, my expression cool. "And?" She took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made her flinch again. Of course you didn't, because why would you? It's not like you cared enough to ask. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Not after what she'd done. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. You both did. And now you want to waltz back into my life like nothing happened, like you didn't destroy everything. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I want to make things right. You can't, I said, my voice firm. Some things can't be fixed. Some things are broken forever. She stared at me, her face a mask of regret and guilt. But I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, detached resolve. You should go, I said, stepping back and closing the door. She didn't argue. She just stood there for a moment, her shoulders slumped before turning and walking away. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding in my chest. It was over. Finally, truly over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. In the weeks that followed, I set boundaries, clear, unyielding lines that he couldn't cross. He could see our son, but only under my terms. Supervised visits, scheduled in advance, with no room for last-minute changes or emotional appeals. He agreed without argument, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet humility that almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. The first visit was awkward, filled with stilted conversation and forced smiles. My son, oblivious to the tension, chattered away, showing off his toys and asking endless questions. I watched from the sidelines, my arms crossed, my expression neutral. It wasn't easy seeing them together, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. For him. For my son. Over time, the visits became less strained. He started to relax, to laugh, to really connect with the little boy who shared his eyes and his smile. And I started to relax too, letting go of some of the anger and resentment that had been weighing me down for so long. But forgiveness? That was harder. Forgiveness meant letting go of the past, of the pain and betrayal that had shaped me for so long. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Still, as I watched them play together in the park one sunny afternoon, I felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. He was part of my son's life now, and that was okay. Because no matter what happened, no matter how much he tried to make amends, I would always be the one who was there, the one who stayed. And that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. With my son by my side and my heart finally free, I knew I could face whatever came next. Because I was stronger than I'd ever been, and nothing, not him, not her, not the past, could take that away from me.